Penny Wittbrodt, and I'm a nurse. I got my nursing license in 2002, and I did mostly critical care my entire nursing career. I did a little bit of home health and some community volunteer nursing for people that didn't have insurance. And what else did I do? A little bit of nursing home stuff, not a whole lot, but mostly just critical care or critical care step down. So where people are in the ICU and they've kind of exceeded their number of Medicare days, so they'll put them in a step down unit. And that's what I was doing until, I don't know, about 6 years ago, I guess. And I had been attacked by a patient. So we were putting a line in a patient, an IV line in his neck. And he was lucid and everything. He's an eye doctor, and he just was mean. And we had him in one of those reclining chairs. And our director knew that he was violent because he had knocked her down on the day of admission, but she didn't tell any of us that. And we had these daily safety meetings, and she just forgot to mention it, I guess. And so he had one of those beds. I don't know if you've seen them. We can take patients' beds and put them really close to the floor. And he would get out of bed, and he'd had some falls, so we had his bed really low. And so I'm in between that bed and the reclining chair, and the doctor is on the other side with his nurse. So the patient I was kind of walking him through what we were doing. You know, you're going to feel something cold on your neck and then a sting. And he just kind of bolted up in that chair, and he said, "I don't give consent for this." And he punched me in the side of the head, and I fell between the bed and the chair. And he hit the doctor and knocked the tray off. And the doctor was trying to unlock the chair to pull him off me, but couldn't figure out how to get it unlocked. And so he just kind of came over the chair and just kept punching me in the side of the head. And so I finally a tech hears the whole mess and comes over and unlocks the chair and gets him off me. And I finish my shift because I'm a nurse and that's what you do. And the next day I woke up and I was having trouble. If I would turn my head to the side, my vision would get weird. And I thought, man, something's not right. And my wrist was hurting and my wrist was hurting and my shoulder was hurting. And so I called in and said that I needed to see the doctor. So they sent me over, and I had broken my wrist and torn my rotator cuff, and they didn't diagnose anything with my neck at the time. Well, that was in August, and in November, it was getting worse. If I turned my head to the left at all, I would completely lose my vision. And so the arm guy that I had said, "We're going to send you for an MRI and see what's going on." And so he sent me, and he said, "This guy's really conservative. It'll be, no matter what's wrong with you, it's going to be a year before he does surgeries," just like that. And so I went on a Tuesday, and he showed me my MRI, and he said, "This is bad. We have to do surgery this week." And so he'd scheduled it for Thursday, and I had to, in the meantime, go for this work comp evaluation. And that was just disastrous. And so I go, and this doctor who can't even get malpractice insurance anymore. I go in with my husband, and he's like, "Oh, she's got full range of motion on her neck and her arm and all these different things," and looked at my MRI and said it was fine. And I can remember when I went back to the doctor the day before my surgery, he actually wrote, and you won't see doctors do this much, he wrote in the chart, he said, "This person either doesn't know how to, or has never read an MRI, or he's a liar," because there was no way you could look at that MRI and think it was okay. And so they scheduled me for surgery the next day. I had to get the declination of coverage service from work comp, so my insurance would cover it. And they told my husband, they said, hour and a half, 2 hours tops, well, 6 hours, because those discs in between 4, 5, the fourth and fifth cervical vertebrae, and the fifth and sixth had exploded, and there was just little pieces of disc everywhere. So they used hardware to screw my neck back together and got all of that disc out. And they used, I can't remember whether it was some kind of bone glue or cadaver bone, because they'd talked about both, but they used one of those. So I had the surgery, I went home, I was in that stiff neck brace 24 hours a day for February, almost to March. And by then I was kind of getting in the soft brace. And then by August, I still wasn't back to work because I couldn't do any lifting or anything. And I had some nerve damage that went down into my hand. And I was just having a normal day. I was in the kitchen with my daughter, we're drinking smoothies, and I suddenly felt like I couldn't breathe. And I'm like, what is this? And at first it was kind of, I don't know if y'all have ever had that, where you feel like you just have to keep taking really deep sighing kind of breaths. And it felt like that at first. And then it felt like I couldn't swallow my spit. And I'm like, okay, this is getting bad. Well, I had a history of anaphylactic reactions to shellfish, but I hadn't had any shellfish. So, but I knew what it felt like. And so I was just getting worse and worse. And my lips were bluing up. And so I had EpiPens there, epinephrine. And so I gave myself a shot, and my son took me to the emergency room. And so I get there, and this is a small town hospital, and I had worked there for a little while because they were expanding their ICU. So I'd taken a job there to help with that. And I went into the ER, and when I saw the nurse, I thought, oh no, I'm going to die. She's got no idea what she's doing. And she said, well, why did you come? You know, you took your EpiPen. What'd you come to the hospital for? And I thought, wow, you don't even know the basic protocol for anaphylaxis. You take your EpiPen, you go to the hospital.
Right.
So she's like, well, we're waiting on a bed for one of the rooms. So I'm just going to set you here in the hallway. We'll get to you soon. You know, and that's a person that goes, I mean, I'm a critical care nurse. That person goes right to the trauma bay because you may end up having to intubate. So I'm in the hallway. I've got Strider, which is, you know, and people are just walking around doing their thing. I'm dying. Give myself another shot of my EpiPen. And finally the PA looks over and is like, she's not looking so hot. They get me in a room, and at this point, we don't have an IV or anything. And I'm crashing fast. Don gets there, and they move me into trauma, and they can't get an IV because when you have anaphylaxis, everything kind of clamps down. Mm-hmm. And so it's just going from bad to worse. And Don's like, if you don't do something, she's going to die. You need to intubate her. And they said, oh no, we've got plenty of time. And it was immediately after that I just quit breathing. And so I stopped breathing. And it's funny because I popped out of my body so I could see what was going on. Mm-hmm. And so I'm kind of watching, and I'm thinking, man, who is that girl? She's pretty sick. I was so depersonalized. I didn't realize that was me.
Yeah.
And you know, I saw him snap the tongue blade, and I'm like, oh yeah, she's getting intubated. And so they intubated me, and then everything was just black for a while. But they flew me out to St. Joseph Main Hospital in Lexington. They had to drill a IV into my leg because we couldn't get an IV anywhere. So I had an IV in my shin bone. And I woke up in ICU 4 or 5 days later. So it was crazy. Oh my God. And that happened in a 2.5-year time period. That happened 18 times. I was on the ventilator every time. I was in a coma every time. Nothing would stop it. We had misdiagnosis after misdiagnosis. We had a doctor that said it was anxiety. I'm like, it's anxiety. Stop intubating me. What are you doing? You know, You can't close your own airway off because you're nervous. And I said, I'm not nervous and stopping breathing. I'm nervous because I can't breathe.
Right, exactly.
And, but, you know, we were at the point that we were talking about putting in a tracheostomy so that I could just come in and they could hook me up to the ventilator and I wouldn't have to be on all the, you know, the coma-inducing drugs.
Yeah, I remember you and I were talking during this time, and you would just disappear for like days at a time, and you're like, "Oh, I died again." I was.
Yeah. People would message me, like if they didn't hear from me for a day or two on Facebook, they're like, has anybody heard from Penny? I haven't heard from Penny. And they were right. I was in the hospital.
Yeah.
They just throw everything, and they're like, come on, let's get her across the hall. And then I knew for sure I was going to die because we were going to the trauma room. And so we go across the hall, we get into the trauma room, and I've got nurses on either side injecting me with Benadryl and more epinephrine. And finally somebody gets a really janky IV in, and they start steroids. And I was better for a little while. Like I'd do better for 15 or 20 minutes, and then it just would start all over again. And so I kept having this refractory anaphylaxis. And my husband gets there, and he walks in and he sees me, and he tells the doctor, he says, you need to intubate her. You're going to lose her airway. And he says, no, we've got plenty of time before that happens. And he walks out of the room, and 5 minutes later, I quit breathing and fall over. Yeah, everything kind of went black. And the next thing I remember, I kind of materialized, is just such a hard word to describe what happened, but I kind of materialized in the back seat of my sister's car. Mm-hmm. And she was driving from Wisconsin to Kentucky, and she was at this gas station. She had pulled over, and it was pouring rain, and I knew my
my body felt weird, like not solid, and I couldn't feel my bottom and my legs against the seat, and that seemed odd, and I just couldn't sort out what was going on. And so I'm in the back seat of her car, and I see her clothes, and they don't match, and I'm thinking, what on earth is she wearing? She looks ridiculous. And she pulls over, and I'm thinking, why is she driving? And I sensed something was wrong. Why is she driving in this pouring rain? She should be home. Maybe something's happened with one of the kids. And I saw her pull her phone out, and she got onto Facebook, and she typed, hang on, or hang in there, kiddo, I'm coming. Well, it was funny because when I woke up, she was there at the hospital, and I said, I saw what you typed on Facebook. And of course, there was no way I could have known that. But it really freaked her out.
So did she verify what she was wearing when you saw her? Did you talk about that?
Yeah, I'd asked her about it. I said, why were you wearing that outfit? And she said, well, when I got the call, I just grabbed whatever clothes were on the end of the bed, and I threw them on and threw some stuff in a bag, and I left. And that's why I was mismatched. And she verified the pouring rain and pulling over and all of that stuff. So there's no question that I saw that. But so, it kind of started like that. And then I popped back out of her car, and I was just in this dark void.
Like the darkest room you've ever been in. And I didn't know how big it was. Like, was I in a closet, or was I in, just a super dark Walmart? I had no idea. I couldn't figure out how big it was. But I still had this image of me floating in this darkness. Like I knew what I looked like, even though there wasn't enough light. And I felt this crazy pressure on me, just my whole body. Like I thought maybe I was wrapped in something. And so I took my hand and I ran it down my arm, and there was nothing there. And that really freaked me out. And I'm crazy claustrophobic. And I tried to move, and I couldn't move. And then I'm really freaking out because I'm so claustrophobic. And I'm just trying to take breaths, and there's so much weight on my chest, I can't breathe. And then I just go out again. And so I wake back up, and I'm still in the dark place. And this goes on for a very long time. If I had to put it in human years or earth years, I guess, it would have been 10 years. That's exactly what it felt like. And I couldn't figure out why I was there, how I'd gotten there. I started wondering if the life that I was remembering had ever really happened. I thought maybe I just made that up because I've been here for so long and I needed something to think about. And, maybe if it did exist, maybe I did something wrong or something happened and I just got plucked out of it and nobody remembers me and I'm just lost somewhere. And it was just crazy scary because I didn't know how to get out of it.
I began to wonder if I had ever really lived. Like maybe I just imagined all of that to have something to think about in that place. I just didn't know what was going on, why I was trapped there, what I could do to get out. I would try to move and I'd drag myself forward a little bit, and then I'd get so tired and go into what I call the deep sleep where I had no awareness. And that kind of went back and forth for a long time. And then finally, I started doing some introspection and saying, is there something that I need to understand or learn before I can leave here, or realize, maybe I did live that life and there's something maybe it's me, maybe I'm why I'm stuck here. And it just occurred to me that the spiritual space that I was in was a picture of the spiritual space that I had made on the earth realm. I had kind of, since my divorce many years ago, I had kind of built this wall around myself to protect me and protect the kids. And, a wall's great to protect you, but it also keeps people out and it keeps you in. Yeah. And so I'd really started to isolate, I went to work, I took care of my kids, I took care of my house, I went to work, I took care of my kids, I took care of my house, and I stopped putting myself out there. And so the isolation that I had built on this side followed me over. Wow. And as soon as I figured out that this was the eternity that I had created, as soon as that realization happened, there was this rumbling and it exploded open. And so now all these little pieces of the darkness, like almost shards, are flying. They're just spinning around. And the darkness is pushing further and further away, and this spirit comes.
And I heard that sort of cracking noise, but it was thunderous. and the void split, kind of like an egg at the top. And the spirits just kind of came down to where I was. And I was like, oh my gosh, there's things up there. I'm not by myself. And so here she comes. And she was big, like grand, she was big in size, but it was more than that. And she was just kind of standing there in front of me, and I felt like I knew her. And I kept looking at her and thinking that I knew her from somewhere. And she just like willed me into her arms. And so now I'm in her arms and she's holding me close and I'm crying. And her spirit is just going like this around us, like this tornado. But it was really peaceful in her arms. And so she held me closer to her chest, and I was just overcome.
And I'm weeping. I'm so relieved that someone's there and I'm not alone and the dark is gone, and I'm just overcome, and I'm crying, and her energy is just circling around me, and mine's still separate, but she's kind of encompassing me. And these shards of the darkness keep trying to get in, and they hit her energy and they're flung further away.
And she puts one arm around me like this, and then she punches out her other fist. And when she did it, the void exploded. And so all of it, there were just these black shards flying around in this bright light. And all the little pieces were trying to get in to where I was. And I was really scared that they were going to get me and somehow take me back. And so the shards would hit kind of that tornado of energy that was around us. And they would blow up into little tiny pieces, and they were just gone. So every time one hit, it would blow up and the light would be brighter. And so I'm in her arms and I'm crying, just crazy crying. And I look up and she's got these just brilliant emerald green eyes. And I'm thinking, man, I know her. Who is this person? And I'm looking at her eyes, and I'm crying. And she says, calm yourself, dear one. And it was like, I don't know if y'all have ever had surgery, but you know how they give you that drug and you couldn't keep your eyes open if you tried. You're just that relaxed. You can feel it kind of go through you. That's what it was like. It was like being given sedation. And I just was super relaxed. And I could feel like she didn't say it, but I heard it in her voice, and I recognized her voice, but nothing came out of her mouth. It just went from her mind to my mind in her voice. And the words kind of got all broken down, and then they just were coursing through me, and I was calm. And I was trying to remember how I knew her, and I looked up, and she had this red hair on her head that was so bright, it looked like it was on fire. And it was like alive. It was moving like firewood. And I knew who she was. In that moment, I knew who she was. And I said, that's my grandmother. So it was my mom's mom, Levita. And she had died when I was 9, I think the summer I turned 10. And it was sudden, and she had gotten diagnosed with cancer in June before we were out of school, and she was dead before the 4th of July. And she was young. And so I guess I always had believed in heaven and that we went on and things like that, but it was weird to see it be true. You know what I mean? Like in life, I had hoped it would be true, and I was really sweating that, because I thought, what if I die and it's not true, and it is nothing like everybody says. And I was so overjoyed that she was there, and she was like more her than I had ever remembered her being. And it was just amazing. And in life, she was just a force to be reckoned with. She worked at a steel stamping plant in Michigan. And I can remember she would come home just wringing wet. She was a bigger lady, like, I don't even know how tall she was, but quite a bit taller than me. I'm 5'1", and I think she was probably at least 5'6". And she was kind of built bigger on the top, and she had no butt, and these skinny little legs, and this red hair. And she was just amazing. And she lived in our upstairs. There was a apartment over our house, and she lived there. And she worked in these steel stamping plants or metal stamping. And I remember her coming home because they were trying to start a union. One of her friends had gotten, and this would have been in like early 70s. One of her friends was working, and she got her hand caught in one of the presses, and it pulled her arm in and caused a horrible injury. And then she just lost her job. There wasn't work comp or anything to protect her. and she was a friend of my grandmother's, and it just went all over my grandmother. And so she was trying to start a union, and women did not do that in those days. Men even faced quite a bit of trouble if they did that sort of thing. And so she was working with people trying to bring the Teamsters in to that plant so that they would have some union coverage. And I remember one day she didn't come home from work, and she didn't come home, and I was sitting on the front porch waiting for her, and she didn't come home, and she didn't come home. And I kept asking my mom where she was, and Mom didn't know. And it was almost dark, and this black car pulled up in front of our house, and the door opened, and my grandmother was shoved out into the street. And she got up and she came into the house, and she was just frantic. And my mom asked her what happened, and she said, they came and they got me, and they told me if I didn't quit, I was going to end up in the Detroit River, and they took her to the river. And she didn't let that stop her, because she was crazy. And I just always loved that about her, that she just had an energy and a spirit about her that you couldn't resist. And I remember she would come to New Year's, or she would come to a party, and it just didn't start until she got there. And she was just easy to make laugh, and she was joyful, and she had a hard life. But it never robbed her, you know, it never robbed her. She got through. And I mean, when I say she had a hard life, she had a hard life. And so there she was, you know, and she was just bigger than I could have remembered. And it was just amazing. And so she was holding me in her arms, and I asked her, and it was so funny because I could think something and it would immediately, whatever it was, like you can thought create there. So if you think flowers, there they are, there's no delay. And it's so much more convenient than it is here. It's such hard work here. And I was in her arms, and I thought, I wondered if I was dead. And she said, oh, no. She said, there's no death. And I was kind of shocked. And she said, no. She said, your body can become useless and be cast away, but there's no death. She said, you're either alive in your body or you're super alive here on this side. And she said, you know this. Do you remember? And I'm thinking, I don't know this. I don't know what she's talking about, you know? And she said, remember when you were little in science, they taught you this. Energy's not created or destroyed. It just changes forms. And she said, that's God's rule borrowed by man. And I was just like, dang, you're smart. And I had known that my whole life. And it was funny because it didn't occur to me that it was true with everything, like people. And apparently it is. And so it was just this incredible, like she would know just how to say things so that I would understand them. I didn't have to sort anything out. When she would say something, I didn't even have to work to remember it. Like here, somebody will tell me something and I'll try to link it to other details so I can remember that thing. But it was just effortless. It was just in you because she said it. And so there I was in her arms, and I started crying again. And like weeping. It was different. It was like grief. And she just kind of let me have it, you know, just have that moment. And I was so broken over everything I had seen in life, you know, everything bad that had happened to me and happened to my kids that I couldn't change, and every horrible thing that I had seen happen in the world that I felt powerless to change. And I started thinking about all the people who really believed and promoted the idea that when you die, that's it. You just lay in a grave and that's the end of it, and there's nothing after that. And it broke my heart for them. And I thought, how must that be to get to the end of your life believing that and thinking every part of all that's good and wonderful and magical about who you are is just over. And I couldn't imagine a God that would let that be. I'm like, why would you make something so amazing? Because we were just amazing. Just to watch it rot in the ground, that just didn't make sense to me. And it broke my heart that people believed it. And I was just broken up and crying. And she did it again. She pulled back from me a little bit and she looked at me and she said, calm yourself, dear one. And I did. I was like, whoa, you know, I couldn't even really hold myself. And I was just kind of thinking about, you know, her being there and me being there. And I don't know, just how amazing it was to see her again. And I got lost in that, and I didn't realize she'd left.
And all of a sudden, there was this like rumbling, thundering, and like this presence shook everything that ever had been or ever would be. Every planet in the cosmos just was rumbling with this energy, and I could feel it in my bones. And I knew something big was coming. And I never saw a person, and I always refer to God as he, just because the energy felt very masculine to me. But I mean, I can't say with certainty that this was a man, and I don't think God is a man. I think it's, I don't know, he was this mix of masculine and feminine because he was nurturing, but that power makes you think, you know, at least me as a traditional person, it makes me think of a man.
Sure.
So, you know, he came to me and I heard him say this telepathic thing. He said, I am. And I had read that in the Bible so many times. You know, he would come to people and they wouldn't know who he was, and he would say, I am. And that was it. That's all he had to say. I'm like, man, you're the stuff. When you could just come up to somebody and say, I am, and you're like, yeah, you are. You know? So he came to me like that, and this light, oh man, I gotta tell you, Brian, there's a resonance, and it's the key of D is what it sounded like to me. And it's hard to talk about. It just had this vibration to it that was alive, that just went through me. And it was, I could feel it just coursing through every part of me. And so I'm there with him, and immediately I got kind of scared. I'm like, oh no, I wasn't ready for this. He's going to look at all the stuff that I've done wrong, that I'm so ashamed of. And you know, he wasn't judging me. He was like super loving and everything, but I just, it was like being naked in front of a crowd. I just was wanting to kind of hide, and he kind of soothed me in that. And I knew we were going to go through my life. And so here I'm dreading stuff like a kid, you know, worried about the parents reading their diary or something. And all those things that I was so worried about, that I was dreading, never came up. What the heck, right?
Yeah.
I think I had probably beat myself up enough about those.
What I can best describe as a video that feels like you're in it just surrounds us, and I can see scenes from my life playing out. And there was and I was super worried about what was going to pop up. And he said, he was like calming me down, that there wasn't anything to worry about, that, you know, he wasn't upset about anything. We were just going to look through this together. And so the scenes start playing out, and there is a scene where I'm in a grocery store, and I had completely forgotten about it because it was such a small thing. But I was behind this woman in line, and she didn't have enough money for her groceries. And I had been a single mom most of my kids' lives. And I remembered what that was like, to stand at the checkout and be embarrassed because you didn't have enough money to pay, and try to figure out what you needed to put back so that you could get out of the grocery store with some of your groceries. And she was apologizing, and she was embarrassed, and I could feel all those feelings she was having, that shame of not, you know, of being 72 cents short. And so I dug through my wallet and I gave her the change, and she was so grateful. And I'm like, it's okay, I've been there. And God showed me her life going forward.
Flashes forward, and I see this woman working in a food pantry, and she's blessing these people with food. And God's showing me, he's like, I want you to see the ripple effect of every little act of kindness.
Wow.
And I saw that, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. And then we went through some of the negative things, and the one thing that really stuck with me was that of all the things I've done in my life that I'm not proud of, the thing that was shown to me is probably the hardest thing to never do again.
And he pulled up a scene that I had not remembered, but was true of my life. It was a good sum up. And it was this scene of me thinking mean thoughts about this other person who actually deserved them. And I was just thinking, you know, that person is just terrible. They're just an awful person, and they don't care about anybody but themselves. And all those things were true. And then God showed me everything that had led up to that in that person's life. And then I felt about this big, you know, I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that had happened to her. And, you know, I didn't know that her dad did all those things to her. I had no idea about all that stuff.
And God showed me, he said, let me explain something to you. So a thought has a certain measure of energy to it. And a word has even more, and an action has more than that. But it all starts with a thought. And there's a thing in the Bible that says, the mouth is like the rudder of a ship. The way you speak is the direction you go, and there's life and death in the tongue. Well, it's the same thing with your thoughts. And, because what you think about is what you talk about is what you end up doing.
Yeah.
And so it starts here. You got to control your thoughts and your heart. And so he showed me these negative thoughts that I had about people, and they were deserved. Let me tell you, these were some jerky people.
Yeah.
And, right? I mean, they're just out there. They are, and they're jerks, and they deserve to have.
Well, you've had some very jerky people in your life, so yeah.
I have.
Yes.
And so he showed me, though, he said, when you spend your energy on this, and you're thinking these negative thoughts, it hurts you because the energy that you put out there impacts you. And I don't know how to turn that notification noise off.
That's okay.
Is it okay?
Yeah.
Okay, we got to get out of that then. Now I lost. Oh no, Brian.
I'm here.
Okay, I went off my screen.
Yeah, you were talking about the negative thoughts and how they have.
Yes, I'd had these negative thoughts about people, and so he showed me that when you have a negative thought about that person, that energy goes out there and it attaches itself to that person, and you contribute to the jerk that person is, because now you've attached more of that energy to them.
Wow.
So this is why forgiving is so important.
This is something new to me. I did not know this.
Yeah. So when you forgive people, it is, people say, oh, it's not for them, it's for you. It is for them, because if they don't receive some measure of forgiveness, that energy is still attached to them and it can't come away. The energy's got to go somewhere. And so when that, energy isn't created or destroyed, it just changes form. So when you have a thought, so if I think something negative about you, that thought attaches itself to your spirit and it makes you more the person that you are, that I'm thinking you are.
Wow.
And when I forgive you, that energy is able to be redirected. And so that little bit of negative that I put on you that made you more the negative person that you are now comes off because I've forgiven you.
Wow.
And so it's really important to that other person's journey for you to forgive them. And it's really important to you because not only does that negative energy go and attach to them, but it attaches to you. And energy attracts energy. So if you're harboring all of these negative feelings about people, even if they're well-deserved, you're just drawing more of it to you because that energy isn't attached to you.
And he said just having those thoughts about her gets out. It gets out in the world, and it gets on her. And it makes her harder to be better. It makes it harder for her to be better because now you've attached more of that to her. And so going forward, her being terrible is partly your fault because instead of thinking kind things and praying good things on her, you focused on the bad qualities she has, and that makes it harder for her to get out from under it. And that was such a good word for me because I was never a person to gossip, and I always hated it. And I always assumed that anybody was gossiping was probably talking about me too. And so and it's bad in nursing. You see a lot of it in nursing. And I would just leave. People would be standing there and they'd be talking bad about somebody, and I'd just turn around and walk away in the middle of the conversation because I wasn't going to do it. And so I hadn't been a person that had done that a lot, but I had shared frustrations, about something that somebody had done before without giving them any grace discussing it. And so that really changed a lot for me about how I saw people and how I interpret their actions. And
it's really changed the way I live my life. And so, here I've got that revelation, and coming off of it, so we kind of pull away from this life review, and I don't remember every detail. We're not supposed to, I don't think.
Right.
But here I am with this loving creator who's kind of let all the big stuff go that I was really worried about. And then I suddenly become angry with him. And I realized I'd been angry with God for a long time. And I told him, I said, you say you're this loving God and you want the best for your children. And I call bull crap. And you can just be so honest. I love that.
Yeah.
I call bull crap. I've seen what you've allowed my own children to go through. And I said, here their dad abandons them when they're just babies. And, you know, him leaving me was hard enough, I mean, and not deserved. And for him to abandon his own children, and I thought, you know, I can take whatever he did to me, but watching those kids, you know, talk to him on the telephone and then go to the mailbox every day to check for a gift that he said he was going to send that's never coming, and watch them walk back heartbroken every day. What kind of God allows that? You know, I said it would have been easier on all of us, and this is terrible to say, but it would have been easier if he died, because I could have told the kids this story about what a wonderful man he was and how much he loved them, and they would have at least had that.
Yeah.
But now they've got this man that's alive that is failing them in every way. And of course, children take that on and attribute it to something being wrong with them.
Mm-hmm.
And I really had held that against God. And I was bitter. And I wanted to be mad at him.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, I was kind of balled up about it. And he said, "Oh, you've completely misunderstood me.
Let me show you something." And so he shows me this scene, and I'm sitting in bleachers and I'm next to my son. And so when all of this happened, my grandson was 2. And in the scene, my grandson's about 5. And I'm sitting next to my son, David, and Cole, my grandson, is running on this field and he's playing soccer. And I remember what the air smelled like and what the heat of the day felt like and what it looked like, the sun looked like shining on his hair as he ran up and down the field, and just how full of life he was. And my son is sitting next to me, and he you can just see him kind of beaming watching his son play soccer. And he looks at me and he says, well, if I can get through this part. He looks at me and he says, "I'm going to be the dad to him that I deserve." Oh, wow, you know, I felt like we picked this life specifically for what it could teach us, you know, that we weren't put in it by accident, that the lessons were meaningful and they were important. And I thought, if that's the kind of good that comes from all of the bad, okay. It sucks and it's terrible. And I would have totally picked different. But he is the dad to his son that he deserved. And it's so funny because I went with him to a soccer game when Cole was 5, and he looked at me and he said those exact words. And so it was this scene from the future, you know, and I thought, wow, what a good God. What a good God. How kind is that, you know? To let me see that come full circle and turn to good. And I just, in that moment, there was no question that I was loved, you know, that fixing it would be nice, but it robs you of things. It robs you of things you really need going forward. And it robbed me of it would have robbed me of that moment of seeing my son overcome in such a big way. And so I remember thinking, I'm okay with the darkness, you know, I'm okay that I had to spend time there to figure out my life, and I'm okay with the light. I'm okay with all of it. And
so I just got to say, even in, you know, I know a lot of your work since losing your daughter has been, how do you move forward from grief?
Yeah.
And these horrible things that happen. I mean, there's nothing I can say to you that's like, you know, and you and I have had these talks where I'm like, you know, you tell me you're having a really bad day, and I don't even try to cheer you up. I'm like, yeah, that really sucked. That was a horrible thing. And I can see why you feel terrible about that, because I feel like people are like, oh, God needed another angel. And I'm like, no, he didn't. He doesn't. Stop saying that. That's like the worst thing you can say to somebody that loses someone. Absolutely. It is.
Yeah.
We just lost my cousin who I was very close to. And
I know, yeah.
yeah, and somebody's like, well, God needed another angel. And I thought, man, I'd throat punch you, but we're in a funeral.
Yeah, exactly. No, God doesn't need any more angels. And
No. He's got exactly what he needs. And God's actually in it for what you need.
Yeah.
And I don't have all the answers and, you know, for suffering and things like that. But I was thinking the other day, you know, I learned when I was over there that before we come to this life, there's actually a decision-making process that we go through with some consultation about what family we want to come to and what general lessons we'd like to learn while we're here, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think we know the whole story before we come. I think we forget it when we get here, but I think we know it before we come. And so I try to remind people of that, because before you came, you knew what traumas you were going to face. And you were like, that's the life I want to live. I want to have those lessons because those are going to contribute to the growth of my spirit and the way it needs to grow. And so this higher you makes decisions here that are terrible, and here they're awful because this life, we perceive it as being really a long time. But I got to tell you, when I pulled out of my body, this seemed like it had been over like that. And so I see these, I see different things. Like I see people say, well, what about kids with cancer that are suffering? Or what about kids that are born horribly deformed? And I just tell them, I'm like, those are the most sacrificial spirits. Those are the ones on the other side that said, I'll come void of even the ability to communicate just so I can show people a love that transcends speech, you know? And
I've talked to mothers of those children, and they say what a blessing they are.
Yeah.
How they totally transform their lives. And it might be a child that never spoke.
Right. You know, I've got a brother who's got an intellectual disability.
Yes, and your brother dancing.
Yes, and John is the happiest person you'll ever meet. And he is a blessing to, there is nobody that has ever met my brother that doesn't like him. If John had a Facebook page, he'd have thousands of followers.
Yeah.
Because the man is infectious. He's just so happy and fun.
Say his name and you have to smile.
You do, you know, and he's super innocent, and he doesn't know better, and a lot of respect. I'll have to tell you a funny John story. John, when we were kids, he worked at Kroger's sacking groceries, and I used to have to go pick him up. He's 15 months older than I am. And I'd go pick him up from work. And so one day I'm in the line at Kroger, and there's a lady in front of me, and John's sacking her groceries. And he's like 17 at the time. And he says in his John voice, he says, "You sure are pretty." You know, so he comes across kind of creepy anyway. He doesn't mean to, but he's got that monotone voice, so it's kind of off. And she's like, "Oh, well, thank you." And he says, "Yeah, you got that pretty brown hair or blonde hair." And she's like, "Oh, thank you," you know, and he says, "And them big boobies." Like, John, no. And he's like, "What? She does."
Yeah.
To him, it was the most obvious thing, and why wouldn't you mention it?
It's the innocence of a child. Yeah.
But I gotta say, you know, I see people, and you know, I talked to somebody on Facebook the other day, and she reached out and she said, "You know, I'm pregnant, and it looks like the baby's going to have Downs, and we're trying to decide if we want to keep it or not." And I'm like, let me tell you something. Those Downs kids will blow you away. You know, they're smart and they're funny, and you know, if we start eliminating kids just because they're going to have some kind of difference, there's not going to be many of us left.
True. Yeah, true.
There was this moment where I was there with God, and I just felt like I had this opportunity to build a wall with him or just to let it all down. And it was scary. I have to tell you, it was scary. People think it sounds easy, but it's not. That's a very vulnerable position to be in with somebody that powerful. And I just did it. I did it. I'm like, I'm not going to put the wall up. And so the light kind of comes around me, and it starts at my toes, and I can feel it going into my toes. And it was just this crazy, weird sensation. And there was like a vibration to it. The vibration of it had like its own resonance that was like a song. I remember afterwards, I'll have to ask Don what key it was. Don! You can't hear me. After I came back, I heard this key. Don played a key on the piano, and it took me back there. And I'm like, what key is that? What key is that? And I can't remember whether he said it was G or D. And I'm like, that's the sound that God made. And so this light and vibration kind of goes into my toes, and then it comes up my legs, and it gets in my middle. And it was like kind of swirling around in my middle, fixing all those, you know how when something bad or, you know, scary happens, you have this sort of visceral gut reaction. Well, that like stays imprinted in there somehow. And going forward in life, you know, I always describe it as that feeling like when you got in trouble at school and you got off the bus or you were walking home and you knew you were going to get it when you got home because you knew the teacher had called your dad, that stuff. We see the rest of our lives through those kind of visceral reactions, and we can make ourselves sick. And God was in there, like, fixing that. And he started, like, swirling around in my middle. And it was like he was putting this cloak or something on my spirit, and just this cloak of light. And it came up and it got in my chest, and I could feel it going through my heart, and just loving me, just loving me. And it came up through my neck, and it got in my mouth, and my tongue, like, lit up. And I was just singing this beautiful song, and I'm a horrible singer, so that was really shocking. And I was like, oh, wow, that's beautiful. I wish I could do that all the time. And then it started kind of going up, and I felt it moving up, like, behind my eyes. And I thought, oh no, it's going to get out. And so I squeezed my eyes shut because I didn't want any of it to leak out. But you can't do that. You can't keep it in because it's, this love, you can't stop it. And so I'm squeezing my eyes shut, and it shines through the lids, and it shoots out the ends of my eyelashes. And I open my eyes, and it hits God's light on the outside, and it goes back in. And it was powerful that it reflected off him and came back through. And so then it goes up through my brain, and I can feel it going through, like, all the curves in my brain, and, like, parts of my brain that apparently do not work on this side were working really well there. And I could see things more vividly, and I could hear things really sharp, and it was just incredible. And so then we start, he's, like, pulling me closer to him. And it was weird because he was around me and in me and through me. And it was just such a penetrative experience all the way around. And to have him still on the outside was really weird. And so I, like, pull closer to him, and I have this opportunity again to decide to go on this part with him or not. And I just kind of surrendered to it. And we start going through my DNA together. And I can feel the strands of it going over my skin as we're going through, like, like your mom would stroke you or something like that to soothe you. And it was just such an amazing feeling. And we're going through the DNA, and, I'm just kind of seeing how I was made. And he said, do you see me here? And he said, look, I'm here. I'm in you. I'm in you. I made you. And it was crazy because I always had this idea of God being this external force, Do
you mean to tell me you've been in there all the time? You're not this external thing? And he's like, well, I'm kind of both. And I'm like, so all of us, even the people that don't believe, God is in there. And he's like, you can't take me out any more than you could take out your own father's DNA. I made you. I'm in there. And you can choose to not acknowledge me. You can choose to walk around saying your dad's not your dad, but we can prove he is.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, I'm in there. And I'm just waiting to love you. And, even through all of this crap you're going to go through. And man, Brian, I went through some hell there for a while.
Oh, yeah.
And, and I've had a lot of trauma in my life. And he kind of melted all of that away. And I started realizing I was going to have to make this decision about going back.
And my knee-jerk reaction was, I'm absolutely staying. Everybody over there will be fine. They'll all be here eventually. And I've never been this loved or this safe, and I want to stay here. But it felt like, I don't know, it felt like it was a decision I had made before or something, that this wasn't it and I wasn't done, and that I needed to go back. And I really didn't want to. I mean, I suffered with really bad, like, depression afterwards, homesickness over having to leave. And I did not want to go. And then God kind of just, I don't know, just gave me this challenge. And I thought to myself, could I go back? Could I go back? Could I do it better? Could I try? And I wondered about that. Could I try? Could I go back? And could I bring all of that back with me and just kind of let the love of God shine out, and leak out of me and onto everybody else, and like I was supposed to the first time. And I thought, I don't know if I can do it, but I could try. And as soon as I thought that, the lights started backing up, and I could feel myself coming away from it. And I got really worried and very tearful. And I was like, wait, don't go yet. And I said, you have to let me remember it, because if I don't remember it, I know I won't have any hope when I go back. And I woke up and I was in my body and I was off the ventilator. And I remember my first thought was, oh my God, I'm heavy, because it's so weird to be light. And I'm in there, and the nurse is sitting beside the bed, and she said, oh, you're back. And the first words out of my mouth were, I was with God. And she's like, oh, that's good, honey. And I'm like, no, really, I was with God. I was with him. And she's like, oh, that's nice. Let me get your family, And so and I'm in a faith-based hospital. And when I had told the doctor that, he sent in psych to talk to me because I must be crazy. And my family comes in, and they come in one at a time, and they're all glad I'm back and that I didn't die. And in that moment, I was glad about it too, despite the fact that that wasn't what I wanted. And it was just weird. So here I have this opportunity to do it again and do it right, or at least try to. And I kind of only half-heartedly committed to it. And so we figured out that what I had was a condition called eosinophilic asthma with mast cell activation, which is a terrible diagnosis to have because there's not a whole lot they can do to stop it. And so 17 more times I would go into complete respiratory failure. I would have, from the time I took that epinephrine shot, I would have about 20 minutes before I needed to be intubated. All it did was buy me enough time to get on the vent. And nothing we were doing was working. And so the last time that it happened, I decided I was done and that I wasn't going to go back and have a normal life. And I mean, being on the ventilator 18 times in 2.5 years, you're in the hospital more than you're out. And it was just destroying my whole life. I'd gained almost 100 pounds on steroids, and it was just awful. I was just sick all the time. I hurt all the time. My lungs, the last time I was on, the doctor said, you will never survive it again. And they wanted to trach me, and I had said no. But so that last time I went back up there, and I was with God, and it was just a very brief encounter. And I said, please just take me or heal me, because I can't keep doing this. And I don't know what you're trying to prove or not prove or what's going on here, but I'm just done. And he said, it's not me, it's you. What do you mean it's me? And he's like, you're not doing anything any different. He said, I keep putting opportunities in front of you, people for you to talk to, people for you to love on. And every time I put something in front of you, you say no. And he's like, if you want to live, if you want to feel better, you need to go back and say yes. This is on you. And I woke up, and it was so funny because my friend Brian, who I knew from a near-death experience group, he had easily asked me 5 or 6 times if I would speak to their IANDs group in Cincinnati. And every time I said no. And I have this, you'd never know it to hear me talk, but I have this really bad social anxiety. And so I had always said no. And he called me up after I got out of the hospital. I hadn't been out but a few days. And he said, would you be willing to speak? And before he could even get it out, I said yes. And I couldn't suck it back in. And I was like, oh crap, I just agreed to this. But I did it. And it was the first time that I had spoken to a group publicly, stood in front of them and talked to them. And it went so well. And then I spoke he also has a group for people who've lost children. And so I spoke to that group, and every time anybody has asked ever since, I've always said yes. And I've not been back in the hospital once. Not for that anyway. I've had a surgery, but other than that, I've been healthy. And so it was quite a thing. And so I've been working on kind of taking down the wall, and it's not an overnight thing. It's a choice you make every day to pull down a brick. And I feel like it's opened up so much in my life, so many opportunities that I would have never had before. And I've been able to just love on so many people, and I was telling you guys that I had COVID and I was really sick with it. And I didn't go to the hospital because I didn't want to go on the ventilator. And I almost died at home from it. But through that, and it's just amazing to me what good can come from bad, through that, I somehow developed this huge Facebook following, because every day I would get on just to do an update on my condition so that I didn't have to get a bunch of phone calls because I was having so much trouble breathing. And I had signed a do not intubate order. I did not want to go back on the ventilator. So if I was going to die from COVID, I wanted to do it at home. And I would get on and I would just do these posts. And some days I was better than others. And I decided that I wanted something good to come of it if I was going to die. And it looked like I was for a while. And so I started teaching people about it. I started teaching them about how the virus works and what could we do to prevent it that would be helpful. And pretty soon I had thousands of people watching this video and, or, you know, these daily updates, and people's kids standing in their living rooms and singing songs for me and sending them to me, and just, you know, cards and gifts, and all these people loving on me that didn't even know me. They'd never even met me, from around the world. And it was just, it's so funny because I started to try to be helpful. You know, I wanted to do that. I wanted to tell that story because I thought, here's a nurse who has COVID. There are people in the country that don't have it there yet. And this is a really interesting perspective to me as a nurse, it would be anyway. And I just got to like speak rationally to people and calm all these, you know, terrible anxieties that people had just from having the news on all the time and kind of this fear stoked all the time. And it became this intimate relationship with all of these people. You know, and I've talked, I don't know how many of them through the death of a loved one from COVID, and trying to advocate for people who are their family members in the hospital and they can't get any information and they can't go and they can't visit and they can't get the doctors to do anything. And so I've worked with them to try to advocate care for their family. And I've watched a bunch of them die, and it's been hard, and I would have said no before the near-death experience. I would have said, no, I'm not getting in all that. There's nothing I can do. I can't help. It's just going to be sad. But I got to tell you, walking through that with people, even as hard as it is, I don't know how it's okay, you know. And somebody said, you know, just thank you so much. You didn't have to do this, and I know it's been hard for you. And I said, you know what? Somehow loving you heals me. And it's just true. You walk people through, you know, the scariest, darkest moment of their life. And I know this as a nurse, you know, I've been at the bedside of people that have died and their families as we stop the ventilator or whatever. And there's this intimate connection, and you build such a rapport with people by just being willing to walk through it with them. Even if you've got nothing helpful that you can do, just walking through it, you know. And it's just opened me up as a person, as hard as it's been to be a part of. There's no way I could say that it's not been for my benefit or theirs. And I've got lifelong friendships with people that I'll never probably meet, but I'm just so invested in them. And it's just a much better life to live. It really is. But I wanted to read you guys something. So when I woke up that first night on the ventilator, and I'll make this quick because I know we're running long. When I woke up that first night on the ventilator, or off the ventilator, let me find this. God had given me this message, and I was supposed to give it to other people, but that felt really weird to me because I'm not one of those people that's like, hey, God's got something for you, you know, because that just feels creepy and weird to me. And he does that to me sometimes, and it really weirds me out. I'll be at church or somewhere out in public, and God will start like nagging me. And he's like, hey, you know, go over there and talk to that person. And I'm like, absolutely not. I don't know who they are, and I'm not doing that. I'm not going to look like an idiot. And he just pushes and pushes and pushes. And then I start feeling really nervous. I always know it's him, because if it's me, I'll just do it. But if it's him, I'm like, there's like that lady over there probably would be happy to do it. And like, she talks at church and stuff. So you should ask her, because she would be much better at it. And he just keeps pushing me, and my hands will start shaking, and then I'll start feeling nauseous the harder I refuse. And finally I'm like, oh, fine, I'll go do it, you know. And so I'll go over and say, you know, I just feel like you've been going through a hard time, or something's been rough for you. And, you know, I just wanted to reach out to you and let you know that somebody cares. I know I don't know you. I don't know what's going on. And then they unload this story that is, you know, and in that moment they did need somebody to reach out. But typically I am resistant of such things because it feels really weird and not preachy, but I don't know. It feels like something you would see in a weird movie about somebody who thinks that, you know, that's schizophrenic, that has some weird God thing going on. And they're going around giving messages. And I've had patients who've done that. You know, they get in that thinking when they're really sick and not taking their medicines, and they say things that scare other people, you know, and it's just part of their illness. And I thought, this is what people are going to think. They're going to think that I'm not okay. But anyway, he came back to me that night. So the nurse made everybody leave. And because she said I was tiring out, she didn't want me to end up back on the ventilator that night. And everybody left. And for the first time, they turned the lights off in that ICU. If you're a nurse, you work in an ICU, turn the lights off at night. That, like, your eyes don't always close all the way when you're on the ventilator, and those fluorescent lights burn your retinas. Like I would see green and red rods for days from my eyes being partway open and seeing that light. But he came back into the room, and it scared me. And I said to God, so this light's like in the room and I can feel his presence is there. And I jumped and like yelled a little bit because it startled me, and he laughed. And it was funny because I kind of had it in my head that since I wasn't up there in the light with him, that he was gone, and there he was in the room. And it just sort of freaked me out. And he laughed because he thought it was funny, and it was funny. But I was supposed to give this message, and I had written this about it. I said, I didn't give it before, but I will now, because the world needs a measure of hope, and who am I to deny it? And God had also told me for me to keeping it to myself was theft. And I'm not a person who steals, so I couldn't do it. So he said to me, such folly to think anything escapes my knowing, as when you were with me, all at once, all that I allowed you to know, you knew. No words were spoken, nor were they shouted. I whispered them to your spirit. I discreetly filled you with knowing. Knowing flowed into you as effortlessly as taking a breath. Is it not so? The great I am. No truer words have ever been spoken or written. The great I am is in your core. The great I am is the light. Even when I'm hidden, still I am. As my energy charged, sending me over every synapse in your brain, even those small fibers knew that I am. They rose and fell to the rhythm I created, to the symphony I composed, I conducted. I consider it a tragic comedy of arrogance when man denies what the smallest innervation knows. Man thinks he acts and moves outside my knowledge. How could it be so? I say, I proclaim he does not. His own fibers clutch themselves laughing at the idea. I am the flower, the wind, the rain, the sinew, the marrow, the rock, the author, the maker, the touch that set in motion all that you see, all that you know, and all that you do not see or know. I knit you. I put breath in you. I'm encoded in every cell. Every nanosecond of time falls in step as I will it so. I am in you. I am in you. I am all. Even when you perceive nothing, still there I am. Even as I tell you this here and now, I press my truth into your breast, your very heart pressing it further in. It was just such a sweet message, and I don't know, he's good that way. I do like that he just has this, you know, that kind of infatuation that you have with somebody when you first meet them, you know, your partner, your spouse or whatever. And you just can't get enough of them. And everything they say is just delightful. And you know what they smell like. And, you know, when I had COVID, Don and I couldn't be together. And so I took one of his shirts that had his cologne on and I slept in it because it was so hard to be completely isolated for 53 days and, you know, not even be able to get a hug when you felt so bad. And he's like that. He's that infatuated with us, you know. It's like a mom, you know, you pick your kids up and you smell their hair. And I can remember picking my kids' clothes up and I could tell who'd worn the shirt just by the way it smelled, you know, because they each have their own, I don't know, their own flower that comes off of them, you know. And I just, as a mother, you know it. And he's like that, you know. He just is absolutely infatuated with us, and it doesn't go away after a month or a week or a year. You know, every day that he sees us, he's like, wow, you are awesome. I did a good job with that one. And he means it about everybody, you know, every person that he sees. Look at that. I did a good job with that one. That one doesn't know it yet. It doesn't know how much potential he's got or she's got. But that's good work right there. And I don't know, I just think it's so cool that somebody that none of us, you know, have really met or can understand is that wild about us. It's just a beautiful thing. But that's it.
Penny, we have a number of people here. That was, wow, you did all that in